He's got a new book out today all about that race for the vaccine. It's called A Shot to Save the World, the inside story of the life or death race for a COVID-19 vaccine. And Greg, welcome. It's great to see you today.
Great to see you, Becky.
So let's talk about this, because I think this is kind of a miracle of science that we all awaited and were so profoundly changed by watching this race happen. And maybe now we've moved on to say, OK, this is pretty commonplace. But what happened, what took place to get that vaccine in such a short period of time was anything but.
Yeah, I think we're a little too close right now to appreciate the miracles of these vaccines. They're really modern science's greatest achievement. You could say the same thing about finance and Wall Street, too, because they played a big role as well. To me, the story of what went right is just as interesting as what went wrong. We've read and heard a lot about what went wrong over the past year or two, but what went right is just as impressive. And there are all kinds of surprising twists and turns that I kind of learned along the way writing the book, including how close Moderna came to not being able to pull off this vaccine. They had really no support. As recently as May 2020, they were running out of money. They went to places like the Gates Foundation, Merck. No one was interested in working with them, and they actually had to turn to a deal on Wall Street, to Morgan Stanley in particular, and that really bailed them out. There were all kinds of twists and turns that I wasn't aware of until I did the research for this book.
So what surprised you the most? I mean, if you look at how long it used to take to be able to get a vaccine done, why do you think these companies were able to move so much more quickly? Why do you think regulators were able to kind of move some of the barriers that had been there in the past, with the obvious note being the pandemic that was raging?
Operation Warp Speed helped. The fact that they were doing the production while they were doing the testing helped. But I think it's really important to remember that these methods, these approaches, the vaccine approach, the mRNA, but the others that I write about as well, people have been working on them, researchers, for decades. And I kind of try to emphasize that in my book. There were all kinds of challenges that were overcome by scientists, small breakthroughs along the way that you and I maybe now weren't aware of. But in the labs, they were making progress. And it wasn't really apparent until 2020, but going on the eve of the pandemic, these approaches were pretty close to being done. The executives, the researchers, the scientists within the companies, in the government labs, they were pretty confident about mRNA, about the adenovirus approach, about the protein subunit approach. So I think it's important to remember it's also kind of reassuring that these weren't produced overnight. If anything, it took decades of frustration on the part of really interesting, quirky kind of scientists that I write about.
Greg, one of the other things this kind of portends is what else can be done at this point? If we know mRNA works for this, what else could we potentially kind of combat and take on with the same sort of ferocity?
Yeah, it's fascinating. One could look back on this period, as awful as it's been, as producing some real good for the world. I mean, people like Ugur Sahin at BioNTech, Stefan Bancel, they're pretty confident about the future. The scientists I talked to within those companies are a little more circumspect, but they're also optimistic about things like cancer, about things like we've turned on the immune system for these vaccines. Maybe we can turn it off and take away some of the ills that harm some people, autoimmune and others, MS, those kinds of things. I'm really excited about the future. In some ways, maybe we've entered a new era, perhaps. And I also find it fascinating who was behind this kind of stuff. It's not who you would have expected. The vaccine giants are Merck, GSK, Sanofi. Those guys didn't produce the vaccines. It's companies that we wouldn't, many of us didn't know about much a year ago. BioNTech, Moderna, Novavax. I find that really fascinating.